Have you ever had a nervous dinner? Maybe it's for work, and you and your colleagues are jockeying to impress your boss, or worse, your boss's boss. Maybe it's a family meal, and you're desperately trying to keep your dad and your uncle from debating politics. Maybe you're with friends, and you're watching one person subtly snub or one-up another. Or maybe you're by yourself at the food court, and strangers a few tables over are arguing so loud you're immersed in their anger. Or maybe the reason isn't clear yet. Maybe things are just not flowing and people seem upset or preoccupied, and you have this feeling that something is off, but you have no idea what it is or how to address it. All you can do is wait and worry. People can be more or less sensitive to these feelings. Myself, I'm on the sensitive side. And if any of the disciples were also, I suspect they would have found the Last Supper excruciating. Consider the context. A few chapters earlier in John 11, we learn that it's almost time for the Passover festival, the great annual Jewish commemoration of the Exodus from Egypt. Unfortunately, the authorities have asked people to keep an eye out for Jesus so they might arrest him if he comes to Jerusalem for the festival. The disciples are aware of the danger. They warn Jesus against even entering the province of Judea because the religious leaders want to kill him. Jesus says he's going anyway, and Thomas comments, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." Imagine starting the journey on that cherry note. Perhaps the disciples' spirits were lifted for a moment when they entered Jerusalem, and they were welcomed by a great crowd waving palm branches. But Jesus, their rabbi and teacher, doesn't seem to share the mood. Instead of enjoying his big moment, he starts talking about grains of wheat dying and his soul being troubled and the light being present for only a little while longer. Now, in our passage, shortly before the Passover, Jesus and the 12 have gathered for dinner in Jerusalem. Finally, they have a private space away from informants and police. I imagine they're sitting around or lounging around a low table, illuminated by the flickering firelight of candles. The disciples have good reasons to fear the coming days, but for a moment, they have a respite, a tiny bastion of food and warmth and light in a sea of bleakness. Yet Jesus is still being weird. During supper, he gets up and starts trying to wash the disciples' feet. And then Peter objects. And now there's a scene. Can't we just have one nice meal? To see why Peter objects so strongly, it helps to understand the practice of foot washing. In the ancient world, the most popular means of transportation was walking, and the most popular footwear was sandals. And the roads were either dirty or sometimes just dirt. Thus, feet were grimy, and a key gesture of hospitality was to offer your guests the chance to wash their feet. We see this referenced in Scripture as well. In Genesis, Abraham sees 3 men approach his tent, and he rushes out to offer them a little water to wash their feet before they rest. And in Exodus, Moses is instructed to have the priests wash their feet before they approach the altar. Finally, archaeological digs in Judea have found water basins placed near entryways, showing us that foot washing was a common practice throughout the ancient world. But the key fact is that people either washed their own feet or had them washed by servants. Abraham offers water to his guests, but he doesn't wash their feet. Washing someone else's feet is a dirty job. Having someone else do it for you meant that you had more status, and they less. Imagine, therefore, the awkwardness of watching your great teacher, whom you revere more than anyone in the world, whom you've decided to follow to your death, get down and do such a menial task for you? It's humiliating. And I bet at least one disciple was glad Peter spoke up, hoping that Jesus would stop before he got to his dirty feet. Jesus rebuts Peter. In verse 8, he says, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Peter then overcompensates, swinging from one side to the other. A moment ago, he was objecting. Now he asks Jesus to wash his hands and his head, too. To me, his anxiety leaps off the page. He doesn't know what's happening or what's the right stance to take. Everything has been so stressful for so long. Jesus reassures him. He says, "That's okay, just the feet are enough." And then he says, "You are clean, though not all of you." I don't think the disciples knew what Jesus meant or who he was speaking about. It's just another weird thing in this tense dinner. But Jesus knew. He goes on to say, "One of you will betray me." And then he speaks to Judas directly. He says, "What you're going to do, do it quickly." And Judas then leaves into the night, but not with dirty feet. Judas is absent for the rest of this dinner, but he was present when Jesus washed the disciples' feet. Therefore, Jesus washed Judas's feet, knowing that Judas would later deliver him to arrest and death. Peter's outbursts are one thing, but Jesus washing Judas's feet, that's the real scandal here. I wonder how it felt for Judas. Was he afraid or conflicted, perhaps disturbed by what was happening? I wonder how it felt for Jesus. Was he saddened, resigned, disappointed? Verse 1 of our passage tells us that Jesus loved his disciples to the end. There's no exception made there, no indication that he loved his companions except Judas. Thus, I believe Jesus loved Judas and showed his love, even to the end, by washing his feet. It's a strange kind of comfort. Jerusalem is tense. The disciples are afraid. Even Jesus is troubled. And he decides, for the first and last time, to wash their feet. The only way I can make sense of this is looking ahead to verse 34, and we'll hear in a moment. Jesus tells the disciples to love one another, just as he has loved them. And what does his love look like? It's bowing down to wash their feet, like a servant, even though he is their teacher and Lord, even though one of them will betray him. I think Jesus knows this time with the disciples is coming to an end. On the other side of the crucifixion is resurrection, but after Easter, the disciples will not have Jesus with them the same way. More than ever, they will need to rely on each other. They will need to love and serve without concern for status or pride. And so, through a meal and a washing, Jesus shows them a form of love and a way of doing life together that can carry them forward. What can we take from this today? I don't think this passage means that we all need to wash each other's feet. Some churches do this regularly, some do not. But to the best of my knowledge, foot washing has never been as central to Christian practice as communion. And for those of us who hate having their feet touched, that's probably for the best. I also don't think this passage means we need to just get used to awkward dinners. Some level of awkwardness is unavoidable in life, but if people are stressing you out, you don't have to be okay with that. You can bring it up or opt out of future dinners, or maybe even just leave. Rather, I think this passage tells us about Jesus and also Judas. It's easy to paint Judas as a cartoon villain, in part because we don't know very much about him. Matthew's gospel tells us that Judas repented. John's gospel does not. But regardless of what Judas did afterwards and how hard it was for Jesus' followers to have sympathy for him, Jesus himself had sympathy and washed his feet, a gesture of love. He had sympathy and service for someone who would betray him to the authorities after years of traveling together and learning. Imagine how galling that would be, how much resentment you'd have, how easy it would be to marinate in your anger and let it curdle to hatred. I've never been betrayed like this. My grievances are relatively petty, but I keep them all the same. I can hold a grudge like no one's business. And so, though I want to say that we should love one another just as Jesus loved his disciples, I can't say it that easily. It's too high a bar. What I can say, though, is that we're all capable of betrayal. We all have opportunities to fail those we love and betray the person that we're called to be. And sometimes we take those opportunities too quickly and find ourselves mired in the muck. Yet, if Jesus can love his disciples, even those that betray him or deny him or fall asleep, we can know that he loves us. He loves us in advance. Even knowing what we're going to get into, he loves us. And that annoyingly persistent way he has. That gives me hope. Because while I'm struggling with anger and shame and a dozen other kinds of dirt, Jesus is already ahead of us. He's waiting with a basin of water to wash our feet and make me and you and all of us entirely clean. Thanks be to God.